Good Wednesday evening, everyone. You're watching Direct Line. Today is our legislative update show with our special guest, Ella Ennis. Now, she's just become a regular here, so welcome to the show, Ella. And your hosts tonight are Mark Unkelfer and Jackie Saxton. Take it away, guys.
Oh, I'm loving that new intro. Dwight was obviously super into it too, right? It was like
did he slip in? Did he slip in a picture of Spiro Agnew?
I think so.
I don't know.
Maybe.
People will have to listen to the end of the show when we repeat that, and you can see if you can spot the Agnew. But go ahead. We have serious business to talk about tonight.
Yeah, so we're going to start out with a little bit of housekeeping. We have a ton of great events coming up, starting out with the Montgomery County Republican Club's Pi Day event, which is March 14th on Pi Day, with special speaker Dave Bossy, our national committee man. So definitely come out for that. Tickets are on sale on our website. I'm sure Dwight will throw up the link. Also, as usual, we're doing this special series with Ella to promote the Maryland Republican Women Empowered. And one of the bills that we'll be talking about tonight a little bit later is about Boost. And our next meeting on March 28th will feature a panel on Boost with Tori Snow, Giovanni Patterson, and Corinne Frank. So definitely sign up for our newsletter to join us for that. And also, Corinne and her Maps Pack have a great event coming up this weekend. This coming Saturday, and Governor Bob Ehrlich will be there to talk about boards of education and getting people trained up for that. So definitely check that out as well. So that covers that. Ella, how are you doing tonight? Thank you for coming back.
You're welcome.
So we're going to get right into it. And let's start out actually by you telling us a little bit about Red Scarf Day yesterday and how that went.
Yes, well, we met we went to the House and the Senate caucuses at 8:30. We had about 100 MFRW members there in person, and we went from the caucuses to the session, and they had reserved seats for in both chambers for our members to come with their red scarves and be very visible there, be introduced. Then we came on over to the Calvert House where we had a lunch, and our legislators came, our Republican legislators came. We had about almost 50 legislators come and talk to the members and talk to them about what they thought was most important bills they're sponsoring. And then people went after the luncheon was over, went over to the Senate and the House for hearings and observed what was going on. And I had several new members say that it was very eye-opening to them to go to the caucus meeting in the session and then go sit in the hearing room. Then afterwards, a number of people went down for a happy hour at Blackwell Hitch, and that was a great deal of fun. Very loud, but it was everybody talking, but it was a very good day. And I was very happy that we could go back to being a part of the caucus meeting, because you then see how the members who are each in different committees come and tell their colleagues what's going on in each committee and what bills are very important, what's coming out, where they need amendments. And so you can really see how the Republican caucus works together. And so it was very valuable.
So can you tell us about some of the top bills that people were interested in yesterday, some of the things that you heard?
What bills were most important yesterday? Yes, Senate Bill 1, which is, of course, the big gun bill, was being finally amended and voted on in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee yesterday. And I sat in on that for about an hour. Which, when they're doing amendments like that, it's really tedious, but you obviously realize how important it is. And that bill is coming out onto the floor today. And so it means it'll probably be up for third reader by Friday. And the amendments, we'll have to see if there are any other amendments adopted tomorrow when they work on that again. Then another bill that was up yesterday was the Death with Dignity Act, and the House bill will be heard on Friday, but it will be virtual only. They will not have it in person. So that's a very serious bill that we need to really look at, because on the surface, people feel that it's being compassionate to allow somebody who is very near death to not suffer. But when you read the reports from the Oregon, who has assisted suicide, that unbearable pain is not even in the top 3 reasons people asked for aid in dying. It's usually because they're losing their ability to get around, or they feel isolated and alone. But it is so it's wrong for them to consider that this is the main reason that you're doing this, is to keep relieve pain, because that's not the top reason people do this. The dangers are that, for one thing, if a person has this medication and they don't take it all, that it could fall into someone else's hands and cause somebody else's death. And in Oregon, they had 300, it was like 338 people requested the medicine, and only 240 or so, I may not have that number exactly right, but it's about that, use the medication. So that means you've got about 100 doses of this sitting out here someplace, and the requirement that it be within 6 months of dying, that they found that like about 10% or 20% of the people wait more than 6 months to take the medication. So doctors diagnosing something like that is very difficult to know that a person is only going to live so long. That's just some of the things that that would be concerning about that bill.
Any predictions on the likely outcome of that? Are there particular senators or delegates that people are focusing on among the Democrats that might vote against it?
I think that the bill could very possibly pass, because when it was up 2 years ago, it only failed by 1 vote in the Senate. It passed the House. So if people are opposed to this, they really need to let their legislators know, because and you find that in Canada, where they've had this for a period of a few years, they are moving to give this medicine to people who are not at the point of death, but who are psychologically discouraged because they have a handicap or they're disabled. And and they're also beginning to use it for children in Belgium. So these are things that is a very slippery slope that people can go down. And for people to say they're too poor to afford the medication or there's the services they need, and to be given this as an option is totally unacceptable. In my opinion, it's very wrong for a society who has the wealth that we have to even consider this.
Well, let's switch to a topic that's a little bit more of a positive for us. Republicans scored a big win in that it sounds like Senate President Bill Ferguson is going to support the Republicans in our effort to fully fund Boost. So can you talk a little bit about that?
About the gun bill, which makes it a felony if you've stolen a gun?
The other one, the
If I
Boost
got that
program.
right. On the bill, and if I'm sorry that I'm not always getting this right, but on the firearms bills, the ones that make it a felony for stealing a gun and committing a crime is House Bill 750, and there's also House Bill 952. And they would raise the penalty to make it 5 years in prison, $1,000 fine for a first offense. And if somebody used a gun and committing a felony a second time, they would have a 10-year minimum sentence. So the fact that someone, because we hear all about these gun laws, but it's not the honest citizen who gets their gun registered who's likely to commit a crime. The person who steals a gun, buys it illegally, are much more likely to be the person committing the crime. And so a mandatory penalty is much more appropriate in the case of somebody stealing a weapon and then committing a crime. There is a bill that was put in that is House Bill 753 to deal with the problem of children under 13 obtaining a gun and committing an offense with a gun. Now, the current law doesn't allow you to prosecute a child under 13 for an offense. And what this bill would do would be to say that they would be charged, but it would not be sent to jail. There would be the effort to intervene with them in the juvenile services court. So it's saying that if we don't help children to stop and realize that they can't do these things when they're 10 years old or 12 years old, it's much more likely to escalate by the time they're, say, 14 or 15. So I think this is a good bill.
So let's talk a little bit about the Boost program.
The Boost program. Okay. I think many people may be familiar with this. Is a program that allows families that have incomes of $35,000 or less, and their child is in a failing school to apply for a scholarship and be able to send their child to a private school, which is a school that will be functioning properly. And people have worked hard over the years to get the Boost program, which is a part of the budget. It's not a statutory program, so it's depending on the money being put in the budget. And they had gotten that amount up to $10 million a year. And if you want to kind of put this into perspective, how small an amount this is that the state Board of Education, the Maryland spends $8 billion on education, and we're talking about $10 million. So unfortunately, Governor Moore has reduced that amount by $2 million. And so the effort is to hopefully get that reinstated to the $10 million level. And the House Bill 737 would actually put it into statute, put the program into statute. So this helps a lot of inner city families and low-income families have a chance for their children to get a really good education, which is not available to them in their schools. I mean, when you look at some of the Baltimore City schools, you have, I think it's 25 schools that do not have a single child reading on grade level. And I think this is totally unacceptable for us as a society.
While Baltimore City gets a big chunk of that money appropriately, given the quality, the issues with their schools, it is actually, I mean, it's available across the state. In I think they're in just about every jurisdiction has some kids that are doing it. I think one of the challenges, and this may be something to talk about is the good news, which is that Senate President Ferguson had indicated that he had talked to people and heard about it and understood how much this affected those families. And Ella, I think it's actually, I mean, it's good on its face that had some influence, but it really echoes something that you have said many times on this show, which is that it really can make a difference when people communicate with their legislator and express their concern, even when you assume they're, not going to support you, but they'll hear an argument or they hear the impact of a particular legislation. It really can make a difference. And maybe this is one time that happens.
Well, I'm sure that in Senator Ferguson's district, there are people who have taken advantage of this program. And, competition helps to improve all schools. If you have people leaving the school because their children are not being able to achieve, then it makes the school rethink what their actions are and their approaches, and could lead to an improved atmosphere and program for the children who are still in that school. And for someone to say that we should not let these children who are doing the best in that school leave and go take this scholarship and go someplace else. I mean, that's very selfish to say that some child who is trying their best to achieve would be denied that opportunity because their parents can't afford to send them there. And we're not talking about, real pricey schools. I mean, we're talking about $2,000 to $3,000 per scholarship.
Right. It's a fraction of the amount that goes to some of the most expensive schools. So some of the issues on vaccines and children, do we want to touch on that? I'm sorry.
The vaccines. The children under 14.
Right.
That bill. Hopefully that bill will not go. But it was the idea that a 14-year-old would be mature enough to be able to weigh the pros and cons of receiving a vaccine without having to let their parents know they're taking it. And if we go back and look at the COVID vaccines and its impact on young boys and men, that there were people who came down with myocarditis, I think is how you pronounce that, and could have a lifelong impact on them. And you just, a young person at 14 is not going to have the experience to make those judgments. But this bill would say the parents would only be advised if the child decided that they should know. And so if your child comes home and gets sick, you would have no idea that they'd had this vaccine. So it's a very unwise bill, in my opinion, and hopefully it will not pass.
So what are some bills that Republicans have put forward this session that look like they're going to get through?
I didn't get that. I'm sorry.
I'll put it in the chat. Give Ella a second to read the question.
Okay, yes. What are some of the bills? Okay, that are going to go through? That's sometimes hard to tell.
We hope.
Yes, well, it's interesting that Senator West has put in a bill to have judges of the Orphans Court elected in a nonpartisan election versus being elected by by party or representing a party, and that has passed the Senate and is on its way to the House. Now, there was another bill that was proposed by Senator Jackson that has been, the hearing was canceled, and the bill, I think, will not go anywhere. But it was to have almost all your local courthouse type offices be nonpartisan, including sheriff and the state's attorney, the register of wills, and a whole group of people. And that bill, I don't think is going to go anywhere, but it appears that the one on the orphans court judge is very likely to pass. And there are some voting bills that we hope will pass, but at this point, it's unclear yet. Probably another week or two will be, we'll really, when we get to crossover date, which is the 20th of March, we'll be able to have a fair idea of bills that might pass.
And an oldie, but one we've talked about before, ranked choice voting.
I'm sorry, tell me one more time and I'll try.
Ranked choice voting that we've talked about in the past. And
Ranked choice voting. Okay. Yes. So far, ranked choice voting is still in committee. Both bills that were 334, which was the one that affects Tacoma Park, and 344 are still in committee. However, there is another bill that we need to be aware of that has been introduced, and it's House Bill 1104 and Senate Bill 878, which is called the Voting Rights Act of 2023. And it's an emergency bill that would go into effect immediately. And it would allow a person of a protected class, and in the bill it identifies protected class is race, color, or language minority group, to make a claim against the county or municipality's system of voting, or the makeup of their council or commissioners, and the way that they're elected, whether they're at large or by district or both. And if if they make the claim that they can't elect a person of their choice, or that they cannot influence the election outcome well enough, they could go to the circuit court in Anne Arundel County and ask for their method of election or the districts to be overturned, even if that's a part of your charter of your, like in Montgomery County and Prince George's and a number of other counties that are charter counties. You've had a charter adopted by the voters, and the method of electing your members of the council or commissioners are set. And but this would say that they could go to the court and ask for something called proportional ranked choice voting, or limited voting, or there's a third one, like collective votings. And it doesn't define what these items are, but it also says that this person can send a letter to the county council or commissioners and say, I'm challenging the system of voting because we're being denied our rights. We're not having the influence. And if the local government doesn't change their system of voting, then they go to court. So it's really intimidation that you could do to a local government. And it also says not only can one of these people who are one of the persons who are a protected class, but any organization that represents a protected class or could likely represent a protected class could challenge your election process. So I think it's a very onerous bill, and it's having a hearing this week and next week, and I would hope that people will oppose this bill. Read it; it's very involved, but it's one of these things where it really could turn a chaos in our election system of our county, local governments, and boards of education.
How would people be able to prove that they're being discriminated against?
Well, it is interesting because it says they don't have to prove that there's been discrimination, but only that they couldn't elect the candidates of their choice or have the influence on the election. I mean, how many Republicans could really make that? We've all been subject to that, and they would laugh at us if we said that. So it's overreach. It's way overreach, and hopefully it'll be viewed that way, but I'm not sure.
I don't know. I demand satisfaction. We need to put a Republican on our county council in Montgomery County. I'm discriminated against as a woman.
Yes. Yeah.
So let me turn to some of the climate and environmental bills, and some of them having to do with low emission vehicle mandates, and also the application of the California clean air rules and how that would affect.
Right. Yes. Those bills are certainly still alive and well. Unfortunately, we've had the Republicans have put into a bill to say that before you could enforce that, requiring all trucks and all cars to be electric, that they would have to do an analysis and show that we have both the electric capacity and the to produce enough electricity to serve all those cars, plus all of the electricity that we already use, plus being able to certify that the transmission system would be able to withstand the transmission of that level of electricity before you could enforce this Clean Air or Clean Cars Act. So I don't know if the bill can pass, but surely we need to slow down on this push to get to zero emissions. And I really feel like that there's behind some of this is they want to be first. They want to be the first state to be able to do this. Well, it's much more important to take care of our people and make sure that everybody has electricity and it has multiple sources of energy to be able to be withstand when we have bad weather, when we have violent storms or ice storms or other extreme weather. And I don't think it's like they're not paying a close enough attention to this, to the reality that we can't make this jump in one leap, that we need to have multiple sources of energy, and we need to consider nuclear energy in that mix, and they're not doing that.
So the House is voting on HB 119 tomorrow, which is the education bill. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going to probably go?
The 119. That bill is, let's see here. The Comprehensive Health Framework. Okay, that bill has some amendments. When it came out of committee with the amendments, I finally got a copy of the amendments today, and they have basically rewritten the bill. Instead of naming the Comprehensive Health Education Framework, they're saying that all local school boards must carry out the curriculum guides that the state puts in place, and that they would be required to develop their local curriculum to be conforming to the state boards. And if they don't, that the state superintendent can request the comptroller to withhold 10% of the county's education funds. And if they don't comply within 90 days, that they would take an additional 10% of the county's education funds. So while I think what it's doing is it's not putting into statute the specifics of the health education, comprehensive health education framework. It's saying that whatever frameworks the State Board of Education adopts, local boards will have to comply, and that if they don't comply, that the state superintendent can ask for this financial penalty to be placed on them, and they won't get it back until they comply.
So it sounds like this
in a way, it's kind of drastic.
It will
but on the other hand,
hurt Republican counties who don't necessarily.
I mean, it's not just the health education; it's everything. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's a theme here of bills that give courts or administrative bodies the responsibility to enact things that the legislature would like, but they can't quite bring themselves to actually put it in statute. So
right.
We see that in the voting bill. We obviously see this in this education bill of their, that they can then come back 3 years from now and say, oh, no, it wasn't us. It was those other people. But this is how they do that, right?
In a lot of times, they allow bureaucrats to actually make the law and enforce the law. From from one perspective, you would say by not having the framework in statute that citizens and teachers and school boards would have an easier time to have them change the regulation. It's still a lot of work, but it's not as difficult as changing the law. On the other hand, it places a lot of trust in the State Board of Education that they won't overreach, that they will be fair in their implementation of any penalties or requests for penalties. That'll be on the floor for third reader by tomorrow.
What can you give us a little background on our State Board of Education, what their makeup is? Are they all Democrats?
I'm not very good on that one. I don't know all of their makeup, but they're appointed by the governor.
So Democrats.
And yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know all their makeup.
So let's talk about some of the tax bills that are out there. Of course, we've got the one, I mean, I know this hasn't gotten anywhere, but we should bring it up. The effort to repeal the escalator and the gas tax.
Right, yeah, the inflation factor, yeah.
Right.
It hasn't moved yet. We still hope that they will consider the fact that inflation is very high and that the automatic inflation kicker that using the urban CPI index is unfair, and it's really harming particularly families of limited income, and they're having thoughts of imposing similarly, if you will, on the minimum wage. They want to put in an inflation kicker on that. And when you watch what's happened with the gas bill, every year, no matter what happens, they never lower the inflation factor. If inflation goes down, they never lower it. It only goes up. And with the minimum wage, you could see how that's going to very adversely affect businesses if you have every year or every 2 years where you will increase the minimum wage based on whatever the inflation factor is. That feeds inflation, because it feeds on itself. So it's very unwise, and we hope that they will at some point be willing to repeal it.
Now, one of the tax bills is the one that would allow counties to increase their piggyback tax. I think that's SB 270. This would allow for some counties to put a higher bracket for their local component of the overall state income tax rate.
On the gas tax, are we talking about
income tax?
Income tax.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not getting that.
Okay.
House spending. Okay. I apologize. I can't.
That's okay. It's the SB 270.
SB 270. Okay. I don't have that. Senate Bill 270. Wait a minute. On the income tax.
Yes.
You stumped her, Mark.
Oh, yes. Okay, that's the more income tax, local income tax relief. I'm sorry. It wasn't, my brain wasn't working there. That bill is still in first reader. It's not moving anywhere yet. Okay. But, when we watch in the next 2 weeks, things will really move very fast, because if they don't pass this bill out of the Senate by the 20th of March, its chances of being enacted is very limited. So each chamber has to pass all of their bills from their chamber by March 20th to sort of guarantee that the other house is going to consider it and vote on it. So at this point, neither the House or the Senate version of that bill have moved. But I would expect in the next 2 weeks, we'll see a lot of movement of bills.
Are there
Lots of voting sessions, the hearings will wind down.
Are there any bills that have started to go through or have gone through this session that have had bipartisan support?
Some of them will have bipartisan support, and some of them will be passed right on a partisan level, a division of the majority and the minority. That's all. I mean, that's happening all over.
Are there any other bills that we haven't talked about yet that you wanted to mention?
I'm sure there are. Let me give me a second here. Yes. Okay. There's a bill, House Bill 666 and Senate Bill 566 that deals with parents' fundamental rights to direct the upbringing and education and health care of their children. And this bill it's having some controversy in that on the conservative side, people feel that implicit in the U.S. Constitution is the right of parents to direct the upbringing of their children. And yet, since about 1990, you have situations where courts and governments have been limiting the authority of parents, or scaling it back, just like what happened with some of the schools where parents have objected to their children using a different pronoun or making some type of transition in their identity, and the parents are being not only are they not being told, but they're being deliberately misled about what's happening in the school. And then you get the things about the COVID vaccines, about masks that children had to wear during that. So there's a lot of desire to make certain that the implied constitutional rights of parents to direct their children is intact. On the other people feel in this bill there is a statement that says that the parent has this inherent right, except if the government has some kind of overwhelming interest in it, and it also mentions in the bill that it doesn't protect somebody from harming their children or abusing their children. But so there's a disagreement here as to whether the bill is needed, whether whether there should be any exception to a parent's authority. So it's something to look at. It is of concern. Now, two bills. We've already mentioned the Death with Dignity bill, and the other bill is the constitutional right of reproductive freedom that they're on the verge of passing that in each house. So we'll still have to go across and have to be enacted by the other body. But so far they've allowed no amendments to it. And it's very far-reaching that not only the idea that you can have an abortion until the point of birth of a child, but that it may extend to after the child is born, if the child has a defect, that under that reproductive freedom, they could allow the child to die. The other part of it is because it says in there that it is the right to reproductive freedom includes starting, continuing, or ending a pregnancy. But it says it includes this, but it's not limited to it. And no one is talking about, well, what are the other things that is included in this constitutional amendment? And you have to wonder if this gets to the point of saying that minor children can ask to have a sex transition surgery and their parents would not be able to stop this. So all of those things are part of this amendment, is very likely to pass, and we will be faced with this as voters next year. But there are other bills in the legislature that deal directly with transgender surgery. They have no restrictions about minors. It's one thing for adults to make these decisions, but for children who aren't really mature enough to understand the lifelong impact of what they would be doing, really is dangerous and frightening, frankly.
I couldn't agree more. And then on that same topic again here, there's HB 426 about inmates being able to choose which correctional facility they would go to.
Yes. The bill that we're talking about here, 426, is, again, it gets into the concerns about the rights of all people. So if a person is transgender and they are placed in a correctional facility, the question is, can that person choose to be in, let's say it's a biological male who is transitioned to be female, and they want to be placed in the women's correctional facility. So what about the rights of the biological women who are in this correctional facility? And they don't get to choose who their cellmate is, but they could be put in a situation of being locked in a cell with somebody who is biologically the opposite sex, or having to take showers with them. So this, there is this bill in, and it's having a hearing. If I can pick up the number here, to allow the, here it is. It's House Bill 426 and Senate Bill 761. And it would say that when the person is assigned to the correctional facility, they would be able to say, this is where I want to be. And that the bill would say that they should be placed in the facility that most closely aligned with their gender. But it doesn't say anything about protecting the biological women that they would be placed with. And it seems to me you've got to protect both people. It's not a case of not taking care of the transgender people. They need to have a separate sleeping units from the biological women. And this carries over to the whole issue about girls' sports, about, gyms and locker rooms and all of that. But this specific bill deals with corrections, and we'll have to see how it comes out. But it's something we need to be concerned about. We never thought we'd have to be concerned about.
Well, Ella, we're getting to the end of the show. So I'm going to do one more round of plugs for our upcoming events. So remember, this Saturday, please go and buy tickets for the MAPS PAC conference with Governor Bob Ehrlich. And I know Nicole Bennett is doing some trainings. There's some incredible speakers going there. Join us on March 14th for Montgomery County Republican Club's Pi Day celebration featuring Speaker Dave Bossy.
Jackie, what will people be getting for Pi Day to eat?
Pizza pies, Mark. Not normal pie, actually a pizza. Everyone's favorite pie-shaped food. Yes, it'll be delicious. And then I'm sure Dwight will go out for Shamrock Shakes after, as is tradition. And then join the Maryland Republican Women Empowered. We have a happy hour tomorrow at 5:00 at Galway Bay in Annapolis. And we have our March meeting on the 28th, which will be about Boost, and has a great panel of speakers for that as well. So lots and lots of great events coming up this month. Plenty to do. Get out there, meet some people who are like-minded. And Ella, thank you again so much for sharing your wisdom with us. We'll have you on, I believe, one last time next month to give us a legislative wrap-up as it all comes to a close for the year. And thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll be back next week with another special guest.
Thank you.